By 624 CE, the early Muslims had spent 2 years as exiled refugees in Medina, fleeing a decade of persecution in Mecca. The Meccan Quraysh had seized every piece of property the Muslims left behind, homes, goods, and livestock, and converted those stolen assets into a massive trade caravan. Intercepting the caravan, the Muslims met an army triple their size, 950 men against 313. The equipment gap was worse. The Quraysh had hundreds of horses. The Muslims had 2. With 1 camel per 70 men, most marched on foot. This was the entirety of the able-bodied Muslim community. The Prophet Muhammad prayed desperately that day, knowing if they were destroyed, there would be no one left on earth to continue the faith. This wasn't a fight for territory or riches. Because this group contained the movement's entire leadership and almost every surviving follower, the outcome would determine if Islam survived the week. This map shows how the Prophet used the geography of Badr to negate the enemy's numbers. He secured the primary water well and neutralized the surrounding ones, forcing the Quraysh to fight on his terms. Even when their caravan was safe, the Quraysh leaders insisted on the clash, vowing to stay and drink wine for 3 days to make a show of force to all of Arabia. To protect his outnumbered men, the Prophet instituted a static defense. He placed a wall of spearmen in the front to block any cavalry charge, keeping his archers in the rear with orders to wait until the enemy was within range. Before the main armies met, 3 champions from each side faced off in a traditional duel. Ali, Hamza, and Ubaidah killed their Meccan opponents in minutes, stripping the Quraysh of their top field commanders before the first arrow was even fired. As the battle reached its peak, a blinding windstorm blew through the valley, throwing grit into the eyes of the Meccans. Between the psychological shock and the environment, the Quraysh lines completely collapsed. The Muslims won through tactical discipline and superior resource control, completely breaking an army that had chosen to fight out of a desire for celebration and a show of power. The Meccan retreat was a rout. They left behind 70 dead, including Abu Jahl, the man who had insisted on the fight, and another 70 were taken as prisoners back to Medina. Customary law in the region offered the Prophet 2 choices for these captives: execution or lifelong slavery. He chose a third option that prioritized the future of his own community. He announced that any prisoner who could not pay a financial ransom could earn their freedom by teaching 10 Medinan children how to read and write. By setting these terms, the Prophet turned the aftermath of a military clash into a drive for literacy. He used the very people who had tried to destroy the faith to build the intellectual foundation of the new Islamic society. The victory came with a personal price. Upon returning to Medina, the Prophet was met with the news that his daughter Ruqayya had died from her illness before he could see her one last time. Even in grief, the community was growing too fast for one man to mentor every individual. With thousands of new converts, the need for a wider educational system was becoming urgent. This growth context explains the logic of the Prophet's later marriages. Having spent 25 years in a monogamous marriage with his first wife, Khadijah, his later marriages to widows and women from various tribes were tied to the social and educational needs of the state. Modesty and social customs meant many women were hesitant to ask a male leader about family law or personal purification. By living with multiple wives who were also trained scholars, like Aisha, the Prophet ensured women had teachers who could guide them on every detail of the faith. Because his wives witnessed his most private moments, they were able to document his habits and character with a precision no soldier on a battlefield could ever match. Badr provided the security to survive, but it was this network of women in the Prophet's household that provided the long-term knowledge to sustain the community's way of life. This was the duality of his leadership. He was the commander who stood on the front lines at Badr, yet at home he was the grandfather who would stay in prostration during prayer for extra minutes because his grandsons were playing on his back. That combination of strategic strength and domestic gentleness is what unified a group of exiles who had lost everything in Mecca. However, the victory at Badr created a new set of dangers. The sudden rise of this small group ignited regional tensions and shattered the political balance inside Medina. In Medina, the Banu Qainuqa tribe broke their peace treaty after a violent provocation, leading to their expulsion. Meanwhile, in Mecca, the Quraysh were pouring their entire trade profit into a massive revenge campaign involving 3,000 soldiers. Badr had answered the question of whether the faith would survive its 0 hour, but that very survival was now triggering a massive geopolitical response, leading directly to their most harrowing test yet, the Battle of Uhud.